are excited to be back together again in the studio, aka the front of our church, in a table with a bunch of microphones. But we're excited today to continue a subject. But before we jump right into it, as always, I'd like to reiterate the purpose of this podcast is to bless Aphesis Church and to be focused on Aphesis Church. And we, doing that, we usually have a little space between we do these, and so we kind of like to just a little bit highlight some of the things that have been happening and talk about what's coming up. Since our last recording, we launched a new campus in Camden, South Carolina, and that's an exciting thing. And we're looking forward to doing more things in that city, but of course having a presence there and just trying our best to follow his calling, follow the stuff that we're talking about, but work in the harvest and do everything we can. I believe wholeheartedly that these are the end times, and that's not just a statement or a segue. It's the truth, and the segue being that following this coming month, we're going to have an incredible midweek series in October, all of October. We will be focusing on end times, and we're excited to have our own Brother Barkley with us on this recording today. And Brother Barkley is going to be he's the one who's going to be managing the helm of that entire series. Of course, at the last service of that month, we're going to come together for a panel, but there's a lot of wealth of knowledge that he brings, but also who he knew and who is specialized in end times, and Irvin Baxter and all those types of things. And I'm guessing, and I'll hand it over to Brother Barkley, it's probably impossible not to rub elbows with Brother Irvin Baxter and not get some end time knowledge on you, right?
Right.
And so we are excited to have you with us today, and just want to say you're on the recording, and the people know.
Well, thank you, Brother Huba. I'm really glad to be here. I'm really glad to be part of Aphesis Church. I've just really fallen in love with the church and everybody, and yes, I spent several years with Brother Baxter. He taught at church camp when I was a teenager and directed the orchestra, and I played trumpet and he played trombone, and so I've been knowing Brother Baxter a long time, and ended up working with him for several years. Assisted him, not really as assistant pastor, but kind of like what we're talking today, just a helper,
Right.
For a long time, and then worked at End Time for around 10 years. Did a lot of different things at End Time, wore a lot of different hats. But yes, Brother Baxter was a man that he impacted whatever he touched. He just had a force about him that I wish I had, but I don't. And like I taught last night, I'm not trying to be like him anymore. I just want to be the me I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
But Brother Baxter was a man that impacted the people in his space, his area, his world, and his ministry is still going today and still impacting the world. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about it right now, but yes, it was really an awesome privilege to work with Brother Baxter, and to have him touch my life like he did.
Yeah. And really, you have, I can speak for myself, I'm sure you can agree, and we have Brother Matmon here as well, always, that, our ministries, because this is a part 2 of what we picked up and started trying our best to talk about last recording on surrounding calling and serving. But there's so much if I could say it this way, so much connected to the people who we were connected with.
Yeah.
And my calling and my comes from God, but it's been so refined by the leaders I submitted to. And it's, having Brother Baxter, no doubt has, iron sharpens iron. And
Exactly.
I'm sure, no doubt, you've been sharpened by one of the best, and which that is a blessing to us, our church, because that's what this is supposed to be about you sharpening us here at Aphesis Church. And I can't say this enough. I tell my wife, I told her on my way home from last night's lesson that you taught, I'm so grateful that we have Brother Barkley in the house. We're so grateful. I'll even cue you in on the conversation I had with the girls in the car. We started, they're like, they started to rate you. They started to, say, where you on the list of Aphesis Church, ministers. And so you're high up on the list. Let's just say that. Matmon's name was mentioned, but then it was close. It was a little going, I had to speak up and say, listen, every one of us is so unique and have such a different way of, teaching, preaching the word. And we're rich. We're rich.
I just wish I could be as sharp as you guys are.
No, we're rich to have you.
Yeah.
And I can't thank you enough that the stars aligned in such a way that you are calling this place home for now. And we would be remiss to not take advantage. That's what we're doing. We're taking advantage of you, especially in your retirement.
How does it feel to be used?
How does it feel to be taken advantage in your retirement?
Well, it feels good.
Amen.
Feels good.
So let's get back into the topic, because the topic, as we started previously, was all centered around serving and callings. And as we walked in and started setting up, it just so happened, I'm going to claim it, that the editors and the authors of the Forward magazine must be listening to our our stuff that we put out, because
Brother Bernard's saying, well, I wonder what Huba's doing down there in South Carolina.
That's right.
And he had to give it a listen. And he thought, what a appropriate subject to dedicate an entire magazine month to topic around it. And so we're excited about this topic and what it means. And so, let's in your, I didn't get a chance to read it yet.
Yeah. So, I like I said, I got home today and saw this on my table, came in the mail. Again, it's the Forward magazine's Pastor mentioned. And the subject, the opening cover, just says the path of a call. And so I opened the book, turned to the page, and there's an article by Brother Robert Olfen, who is in O'Fallon, Missouri. And the article just kind of delves into, I think, what we'll be talking about tonight. In the first sentence, the opening sentence talks about and identifies calling as an individual's God-given purpose in living out his or her life for the glory of God. And then he breaks down these, really three areas or three characteristics, if you will, that encompasses the journey of living out one's calling. And they are the service to God, service to the man or woman of God, and service to the people of God. And then he just kind of goes in and breaks each of these down. And I think what stood out to me, a couple things stood out to me, but you guys can see I've got red all over this article. But in the service to God category, he says one's pursuit of this calling results in becoming like him through personal relationship. And how timely is that? Again, Brother Barkley just last night spoke about wanting to be, I want to be like Christ, like Christ. And so when we talk about calling, when we talk about service, it does. It begins with a service to God. It begins with a relationship with God. We made the point last time, you can't truly serve God until you learn to serve the people of God, right? And we talked about relationship and the importance of that. And that's really where a lot of ministries are birthed out of, outside of not to rehash what we talked about last time, but outside of a verbal call from God, yo, I'm calling you, right? That kind of thing. When we focus our efforts and our attention and our anointings and our talents toward relationship, yes, with God, and also with the people of God. I mean, God just does wonders, wonders through that and through that avenue. So, and then he talks about service to your pastor, and again, service to the people of God. And he ends the article saying that calling never stops.
Amen. That's so true.
Calling never stops. I mean, Brother Barkley, you're no spring chicken, right? I mean,
right.
You're an elder.
Yeah.
And you're still going. You're still serving the kingdom. And maybe we can talk a little bit about, your time serving as a missionary in Chile, but you retired from over there. You came over here and you're still going.
Yeah.
And so maybe you can speak to that a little bit. What was that like for you, to go from serving this group of people over here in one country to now coming over here in Columbia, South Carolina, of all places, and to serve further?
Well, people are people. And the language is different, customs are different, culture is different, but people are people. And when you love people, none of that really matters, because people are people, and you want to touch people. You feel the need of people. I'm just fairly new here, and I hope what I say isn't wrong, but I've been around here now, and I see people, and I feel that person is hurting, or they're struggling with something,
Right.
and that calling inside of me makes me want to serve that need.
Yeah.
It just comes out of me. I can't help it. And so, really, Brother Matmon, there's not really much difference, honestly, because that's what I did there.
Yeah.
When I was getting ready to retire, as men, we identify with our vocation.
Yeah.
That's just I was a missionary. You are a pastor. We are what we do for a living, pretty much.
Yeah.
And so I'm praying, Lord, when I go back home, I'm not going to be a missionary. What am I going to be?
Yeah.
And it really bothered me, and I prayed about it a lot. And the Lord, through a lot of different avenues that I won't go into and take time to, but he let me know that my ministry was a ministry of Barnabas. When I first went to Chile, I felt like I had to be like Paul, and I was frustrated. And finally, one day, the Lord said, "You're not Paul. Stop trying to be Paul." But I got to thinking about Barnabas, and he's the one that took John Mark. Hey, come on, we can do this. And so the Lord spoke to me one morning when I was praying. And he said, "You're going to do what you do here. You're going to be Barnabas."
Yeah.
And I see that.
Yeah.
I see that happening in my ministry. And, again, I'm not trying to, it's not a brag. It's just, it's what I feel called to do.
And let me ask you this, you have served in multiple roles and positions. I had, I sat under a pastor one time. I was the assistant pastor of this church, and it was a church that I was, supposed to, he said we're supposed to, step in and take over. And, the conversation I had with that pastor, was brought up, would he still, because I asked him what was his plans after the transition. And, did he want to stick around? Did he want to, move closer to grandchildren? What was, because my hope was that he was going to stick around. There's a great value in the bishop and in the elders and things like that. But he said something to me that's always stuck out to me. He that always I'll never forget. He just said, well, whenever I retire from this position, well, I'll fulfill the next position, because there is no retirement in the kingdom of God.
Exactly.
And he said, whether it's the opportunity to teach and preach behind a pulpit, or I hold a broom and sweep where I can sweep, I'll still work in this kingdom.
Exactly.
And he had such a great spirit about that, the way he said it, the way he was, the humility of it all. And, the question I have for you is, because of the roles you've been in, you've no doubt have served in multiple places in any church, but when you stepped into that pastoral role, I know that you've pastored, but then you stepped into a missionary role, and not just a missionary, but a missionary over missionaries, and now in this season of retirement, what does that feel like? What does that transition feel like for you today?
Well, the stress is gone. First of all,
yeah,
the stress is gone.
That's probably a God thing.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely. The stress is gone because there was stress involved in leading a national work, in leading people. You both understand what I'm talking about, where I'm coming from.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have that now. What I have now is the freedom, I guess is the way to say it, to see those things I was talking about.
Yeah.
I got no dog in the fight,
Right.
That wasn't probably a good
I know what you mean.
analogy, but I just help. I see somebody, and I feel something in my spirit, and I can just go talk to them with permission.
Yeah, always. Yes.
And with always in mind that I'm here to lift up the hands of the ministry that's here.
Yeah.
And if I can't do that, then I better step back.
Right.
Absolutely, that's number one. But you just feel things, and to go in and, well, I'm kind of drifting. It gives me the freedom or the liberty to see those things.
Yeah.
On some level, I feel like you're describing what I would say, like the pressure that comes along with the position. And sometimes that pressure can really, I don't know if prevent's the right word, but really stand in the way of us feeling that liberty to go and say, like you said,
it
to go
clouds.
and pray. There you go.
It clouds.
It clouds. Is the decision I'm going to make, or is the step I'm going to take, how is that going to affect from this position that I'm on?
Right.
I kind of think that's what you're hitting on there.
You have to deal with things. The only word I know to use, and it's not really correct, but it's a political thing. How does this affect this?
Yeah.
Because I'm in this position, and if I say this, how is it going to affect this over here?
Right.
But when you move out of that position, you don't have that.
Yeah.
Right.
Because, this guy doesn't care if I say this to this person. He's not going to get upset, because I'm not affecting policy.
Sure. There's a position where I would say the pastor has the ability to make a direct choice. And I think what you're describing is a position of influence.
Yes, exactly.
And the position changes where, I'm not the one literally hands on the steering wheel.
Yes, sir.
But I am the voice in the ear.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
And that's probably one way to look at that, is that how can we be voices and ears that to help them, influence them in wise decisions. And
that says it exactly.
You hit
nailed it.
You hit on something earlier too, when you were kind of laying out and answering the first question. You hit on how when you first left to Chile to come here, or when you were preparing to leave, there was a bit of a question of identity. I wanted to ask you about that. Like what would you say to somebody? What would you say to a younger leader, pastor? Maybe they've been pastoring for a while. Maybe they're in the missionary field right now. Maybe they're feeling that shift from God to sort of, do something different in their ministry and through their ministry. What would you say to them when how to respond when they feel that identity kind of crisis, if you will? Say when failure comes, right? Or say when, and we talked about this before, Pastor, sometimes, we know people who have started daughter works, for example, first, second, third, fourth daughter work, it doesn't pan out. And there's that instant, if we're honest with each other, with ourselves, there's that initial feeling of, man, I failed God. Well, did you really fail God? So what would you say to somebody who is, in that crisis situation of identity, because they're facing setback or just because they're facing potential change?
Well, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
The first thing that comes to my mind is every time my ministry was making a change. God gave me absolutely definite confirmations. Real quick, when I went to pastor in Petersburg, I was feeling what you were just describing, that turmoil inside. God, you called me to preach, and here I am, and if preacher hears this, he's going to know what I'm talking about, if he's really called to preach. But I finally went to the church one day in Sheridan, Indiana, and I was desperate. And I don't necessarily recommend people doing this, but I prayed for 3 hours. I stayed down at the church, and I pounded the altar, screamed, and hollered at God. And I said, God, you're going to talk to me this week. I don't care if you don't want to, you're going to. I said that. And I said, I'm going to go on a 3-day fast, and you're going to talk to me this week, or don't ever bother me with this call to preach business again.
Wow.
I'll live for you. I'll pay my tithes, and I'll be faithful to this church right here, but don't bother me with this call to preach. I can't live like this. So I went on a fast. The day the fast ended, I was in my living room, and it was a day back in the days when you had a corded phone, and my phone rang. I picked up the phone, and when the phone was ringing, the Holy Ghost spoke to me and said, this is a call you're waiting on. And I said, somebody in the room, this is the call I'm waiting on right here. And it was a man calling me about a church.
Wow.
And I knew I was going to that church. When I went to Chile, I don't know how many things. There probably 7 or 8 miraculous things that happened. I don't have time to get into it here, but it was miraculous. God showed me, and I knew. I prayed, and I said, God, I want you to make this so real that even the devil can't doubt it. And he did. So the first thing I would say is pray until God talks to you.
Wow.
And when God talks to you, it will work out.
It's good.
That's if God sends you, God will back you up.
Yeah, man.
If you just went, God will help you.
Yeah.
Because he loves us.
Oh, wow.
That's right.
That's good.
But he may say, Bubba, you got yourself out of here now, learn something here.
Wow. Yeah.
But if he calls you and sends you, he's going to walk with you every step.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you're not going to dodge some bullets, because you will, but he will help you. He will be with you.
I asked you that question too because I know of a few people within our own church. I know this is to bless our church, who are dealing with that do I continue to pursue this endeavor?
Yeah.
Do I, or do I, how do I know that God is going to solidify what I feel like He's calling me towards?
Right.
So I think when we talk about service, I think the subject of identity, while it's a big one, I think it's an important one because sometimes we can get locked into, one way of thinking. We get locked into, and I mentioned this last time, we just get locked into one way of doing things, and for me, I think sometimes it can prevent us from allowing God to ask us to shift. Right? Doesn't shift who we are at our core. Doesn't shift our core calling.
Right.
But it may be just a different position. It may be a different season in our lives. And so, if you were, and Pastor, if I can ask both of you guys this question, if you guys were going to talk to your younger self, I don't know, pick an age, let's say when you first started ministry, what would you say to your blank old self about service, however old you were at that time? 30 something. When did you start ministry?
I started preaching when I was 17.
So 17. What would you say to your 17-year-old self about service? I know it's a broad question.
I would say what my dad said to me at least 1,000 times. Whatsoever thy hands find to do, do it with your might. If it's sweeping the floor, sweep the floor with like you mean it, like you want to get it done. If it's teaching a Sunday school class, teach it. If you're preaching to 2 people, preach like there's 2,000. Just do it.
Yeah.
Just because I grew up cleaning the
Church.
cleaning up after
services,
fellowship and all of that, putting chairs away like we do in Camden. That's the way I started. Picking up paper. Still to this day, if I see paper on the floor, I pick it up. And I followed a trail of paper
to your grandchildren.
Well, yeah, it's more real than what you think. But I followed a trail of paper to Santiago, Chile.
That's
Looked up one day,
That's
and
powerful.
here I am in Santiago.
Wow.
How'd this happen? Picking up paper.
That is good.
Pastor, I want to ask you the same question, but when he said something about whatsoever thou findest thy hand to do, and there was a quote, I just shared this with a couple of guys in our church this week, by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It says, if it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, you may be familiar with this, sweep streets like Michelangelo painted pictures, like Shakespeare wrote poetry, like Beethoven composed music. Sweep streets so well that all the host of heaven and earth will have to pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper who swept his job well.
That is awesome.
Isn't that awesome?
It's awesome. That's awesome.
That is awesome. You can't say it quite like Martin Luther.
No, of course not. That's why I didn't try. I'm just going to read it.
What you said is exactly an addition to what I want to say. Not for me. I didn't have any struggles with like, hey, was there something to do? I'd do it. I think that has a lot to do with good upbringing. I had a great father who was an example for me when it came time to work. And when the church was, and again, I've made points about this. He still do that, and I have to get on him to not do it because he's not in the physical condition to do it. And I had to get on you at Camden the other day when you were stacking chairs. I'm like, what are you doing? You're not in the position to stack chairs, but sometimes it's just in you. And so I witnessed that, and some younger pastor's going to yell at me one day. But if I could speak to my younger self, I'd probably tell him this, that really enforce this, that your ministry really has nothing to do with that pulpit. And everything to do with prayer.
Yes, sir.
And if you could not just stare at that great pulpit. Now, I went to a church with a great pulpit. And so I equated ministry with that pulpit. And if I could get in my DeLorean and drive 88 miles per hour as fast down that road and hit that time machine, get to where I'm going, I would pull me into a corner and say, if you can truly get addicted to prayer and understand prayer like you understand now, not that I have it all figured out, but it's through prayer that where I am today. Like you talked about picking up paper, it's the same way how I look at everything God has allowed me to get to and experience is because of prayer, not because I was able to have charisma or I had a good message or I could make a title well. It's just really prayer, because if you can hear the voice of God, man, you
Absolutely.
save yourself a lot of hurt, a lot of pain,
And
a
other
lot
people,
of
too.
Other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of lessons I learned that hurt me that I signed up for, and I realized that. And I signed up because you ever know a college course, you're looking at the path of what that curriculum is, and you're saying, oh, okay, I need this, I need this. But sometimes they'll give you a synopsis of a little shot of what that class is, right? It's kind of like what prayer is. Prayer will give you that look of what this class is. But if you're not good at prayer and you're just signing up for stuff, you could sign up for a class that you, number one, don't need to take. That's not in your wheelhouse. That's not for your life. And you can go through a lot of hurt and pain without prayer because you weren't willing to pause and slow down.
Read
So
the
for me,
syllabus. Yeah.
I would say the first thing is pray better.
Yeah.
Because I not to say I didn't pray. It's just I could have prayed better. We always could pray better. We still can pray better. But I definitely knew in the beginning, get better at prayer.
Yeah. Amen.
Because that's when I started to change the way I pray. That's when I felt it. I felt it, affirmed it through others, affirmed it through God. My ministry just went
Upward
totally
trajectory.
different. Yeah. So
Yeah. This article makes the point, again, Brother Ofen's article says, calling originates with service to God. And Brother Barkley, at the opening, you made the comment just in passing. You don't even know when you're being revelatory. But you made the comment, I wrote it down, if you can't serve, you ain't called. Talk a little bit about what that means. Like, what does that mean for some young leader or young person in our church?
When I told my pastor, Brother Jenkins, E.L. Jenkins, you guys don't even know E.L. Jenkins.
he sounds like a pastor. Sounds like
He
a
was. He
Like a
was.
bishop.
He's got the name for it.
Yeah.
Oh, man. But when I went to him, this will let you kind of know how he was. When I went to him and told him, Brother Jenkins, I feel like God's calling me to preach. And it was at a youth rally.
Mm-hmm.
He said, I think God's calling me to preach. And he said, well, let's find out tonight.
Just like that.
Get back down there and find out. And so I, said, yeah, I think God's calling me. Went, I don't know, a few days or weeks or something. And finally he came to me and he said, he told me he wanted to talk to me after church on Sunday night. He said, I need to talk to you after church. And so, this was before church. So, I thought, man, he is going to have me preach Sunday night. I just know he is. Really dumb. And so, I waited around after church, and we had an evangelist, and he took the evangelist out to eat and forgot all about me. And so Wednesday night Bible study, I said, what do you want to talk to me about, Brother Jenkins? He said, talk to you. Oh, yeah. Yeah. He said, well, if you're called to preach, you need to be helping me around here. And I said, what do you mean? He said, just whatever I need you to do. And so for 6 years,
Wow.
I stopped by his house on my way home from work almost every night. Knocked on. Now, I don't necessarily recommend this. Probably
Sure.
drive
Yeah.
you crazy.
Yeah.
But it's a different generation, different time.
We can text.
Knocked on his door. What do you need me to do tonight?
Yeah.
He said, well, why don't you pull those weeds out behind the church? Why don't you paint this room? Or he always had something for me to do, and if he didn't have something for me to do, I just studied in the church. But I did that every night for 6 years. And he never one time asked me to preach. Not once.
Wow. In 6 years. Yeah.
Never did.
Never. Wow.
Never did.
Wow.
But I sure cleaned a lot of toilets. Pulled a lot of weeds. But that is service.
Yeah.
Amen.
It was inside of me. It burned inside of me. It still burns.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm almost 70 years old, but just because there's snow on the roof don't mean there ain't no fire in the furnace.
Yeah. I if I could kind of segue into kind of what I had written down for tonight, is it has a lot to do with perspectives and how you perceive the calling you've been given, but how you perceive someone working with you. I've mentioned this before to some of our younger ministers who we've trained here over the years, that you see in Scripture really two main ways that someone's called. And you see and I break them up into the stories. The first one is the call of Samuel. God speaks to Samuel in that night, but Eli doesn't hear that calling.
Right.
So Samuel's spiritual authority doesn't hear the calling that is happening for Samuel. Mm-hmm. But through that process, that story, he keeps coming up. Did you call me? Did you call me? And Eli finally gets it. He's like, I know what this is. You just need to respond to the calling of God. And he instructs him. And of course, the rest is history for Samuel. The second individual who kind of represents who I feel we see more of is the call of Elisha. And the call of Elisha in 1 Kings chapter 19. And I'm going to go ahead and read a few texts just to talk about it. But verse 19 says, "So he departed thence and found Elisha." This is Elijah. So Elijah departed thence and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen before him, and he with the 12th, and Elijah passed by him and cast his mantle upon him. Now we've heard this story before, how there he is doing what he's supposed to do. Elisha's just working. Mm-hmm. He's serving. His hands are on the plow. He's not looking back. But here comes the spiritual authority in his life, and sees that here is someone I need to invest in. Here, he's not only that. I believe the verses before, there's God is impressing upon him, but God speaks to Elijah about Elisha, and that's the other category where a pastor can see something in somebody in the church, and that pastor can go to that person and in one way cast his mantle on him, or approve him, say, hey, I can tell God's been speaking to you, or there's investment there, and that type of affirmations in the calling. But when I bring up perspectives, is the way you had a perspective of your pastor just telling you to do certain tasks, and you made a statement that you said you can't. It was from a different generation, different time, and yes, it was, but it's something that should never leave. That same spirit needs to be here today, because I was looking at the statement, casting the mantle, and casting the mantle wasn't a gentle putting of the mantle. It wasn't just this, you ever have your wife is cold and you're the one with a jacket, and you take your jacket off and you put that nice jacket on their shoulders very gently so they're warm by it. That is not what happened here. I believe he whipped him with his mantle. I believe when he cast it, he hit him in that mantle, because there was such an abrupt, like, whoa, what's going on? And so I say is that sometimes when God is calling us and our spiritual authority is involved in it, the casting of the mantle process feels like chastisement. And it could feel like, hey, you need to be rebuke. And sometimes we misunderstand rebuke. And we don't realize, if my pastor's rebuking me, that means he's refining me. And he's seeing if I have a pastor who's willing to call me into his office and say, hey, I noticed something, and he rebukes me in that moment, yes, I can walk away feeling bruised, beaten, and battered. But at the same time, that means my pastor sees something in me and is taking the time to refine me. Right. And it's about perspective, because if you heard and felt like God called you to something, and then on top of that you're getting that chastisement, just like Revelation says, 3:19, I believe, right? I love those who I chastise. There's something there. There's a loving process that I would encourage those in our church if they feel like God has something for them, I hope your perspective of me coming to you and challenging you on maybe your character, or challenging you on to live a more separated life. I hope you understand it's a casting of the mantle process. It's a rebuke process that is meant to refine you and to separate you from this world and to separate your calling from this world. And I do believe that we have those moments where if we don't have the right perspective of that, we can make enemies out of our leadership.
Right.
And say, why are they always beating up on me? Why are they always hurting me? Now, it's the job of the leadership to do it with some clarity, not to take advantage, but at the same time, I don't like hearing that's from a different generation. It needs to be still the same biblical process we see. I think it's vital. It's important. If you're feeling a calling, you should want to serve the church anywhere you can. You should want to be here when the doors are open. You should be on Saturdays when there's something extra happening that you're the first one at the door, trying. And you should be knocking on my door and saying, hey, can I get a key to the church so I can get in there and either pray more or I can serve more or do something. That's vital. Those things are so important. It speaks a lot to the heart of the person who's serving.
Yeah,
because they see that.
I was going to say, I think just like perspective, you mentioned perspective is an important element. I think trust is as well.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'd have to go back and study this out, but I'm curious to know about the relationship between Elisha and Elijah, and whether or not they had prior interactions. I mean, I don't know if you guys know, but let's just play advocate for a second. If Elijah was a stranger to Elisha, who is Elisha putting his trust in? Most likely in God, to say, I recognize this as a man of God. I don't know him, but I'm going to trust that this process is from God. Okay, let's just, if we're assuming that. But if they did have prior interaction, and Elijah is coming to Elisha in this moment, I feel that in order for Elisha to respond the way he did, yes, he has to have the right perspective, and he also has to have the trust. He has to trust his pastor. And trust his leader. And and so to that person who is feeling like pastor is paying, and let's put it this way, pay more attention to you, right? Because he sees something in you, because just trust pastor. And I want to hold a space too, for those who have maybe come from, past church hurt, people who have had terrible experiences, unfortunate experiences with leadership, but trust that in our church, this Pastor Huba, and trust in what God is doing through you or for you through him.
I look at it, can we handle the chastisement of the mantle?
Yeah.
And I not just from the hand of the pastor or the spiritual leader, but the calling.
Yeah.
Can you handle the chastisement of a calling? There's, I think I've shared this story. I can't remember if I shared this last time. I share it sometimes when it comes to this, about Matt Damon. I remember hearing an early interview about him back when he was, I know he's famous now, but when he was real famous and doing a lot of projects. And a reporter, someone came up to him and said, what would you tell an up and coming actor, what would you tell them getting into this business? And he looks at him. He says, I would tell them not to do it. Go find something else. Like, hey, it's not. I'm telling you, it's not worth it. It's just not worth the hurt, the stuff you got to go through, the callbacks, the all the stuff, the ups, the downs, the mental aspects, living on a friend's couch for months because you can't afford, teaming up with your ugly friend Ben Affleck to try to write some stuff. It's not worth it. And then he says this, which was so interesting to me, that always stood out. He says, now if they believe me, then good. Because you have to understand that in that moment, if you hear all that and you say, no, I'm still going to do it, that's what it takes.
Yeah.
It takes you pressing through all the no's and the negatives. And that's the truth, even with the calling of God, is that you'd be surprised how many no's and negatives are found in the church versus those in the world. The world's hungry for you to serve them. You'd be surprised how many in the church want to sign off on your ministry.
Yeah.
And that was the reason Brother Jenkins didn't promote me.
Yeah.
After he died.
Yeah.
After he died, his wife told me, he said, Brother Jenkins always believed in your calling. But he just was of the school that if anything can stop you, it will.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Man, Pastor, what you're saying and you're bringing out here, again, I think this this article was a godsend today. Okay,
Yeah,
let me just point back to something that Brother Olfen said. He said the journey, calling involves service to one's pastor, the man or woman of God in their life. The journey of living out one's calling involves submission and serving the God-ordained leader or pastor in his or her life. And then he quotes, gives reference to Hebrews 13:17, which says, "Obey them that have rule over you, and submit yourselves, for they watch for your souls." Did you read that earlier?
Yeah.
Yeah. They watch for your souls, as they that must have account, that they may do it with joy and not with grief, for that is unprofitable for you. And so this watching, if they were to do it with grief, is unprofitable for the people that they're watching over.
Yeah.
It's kind of how I read that. So I think what you're saying is just so timely, so powerful, and so we need to consider it as we go through our ministries and serving God.
I can, I tell these particular stories. I remember, for me, again, I grew up in a large church, and there was a backup to a backup to a backup. And my internal thinking was, I've got to do something grandiose to prove that I'm called. And for me, it was go to Bible college. Like, if I go to Bible college, that's going to prove to my leadership I'm serious. Now, and I really mean this, and anybody who truly knows me, I'm that guy who, if I were to walk back into my hometown, they would go, "Isn't this the crazy guy?" Like, they would not allow me to minister to them, because I acted the fool. I was fleshly. Even though I grew up in the church, I knew how to grow up in the church, and I was, I did foolish things that no minister should do. Nobody who trying to be in ministry. But when the call of God hit me like a ton of bricks, and I couldn't get away from it, and I tried to pivot and tried to be obedient to that, I remember going to my youth pastor and asking him for an application to IBC, and he laughed. He literally laughed in my face. And then he goes, oh my God, you're serious? And I said, yes, sir. But I also had to understand, like, I earned that. I earned
you earned that laughter.
Earned that critique.
Criticism.
I remember going to my pastor one time after my first year of IBC, and I came home for a break or something, and I asked to see. I just felt so called to preach, and I asked my pastor just to talk to him about it, and so I remember him going to him saying, "I feel like I'm called to preach," and he said, he shook his head and said, "Well, I haven't heard from God about that yet." And I remember that moment feeling so dejected, even though I don't think he was lying to me. I don't think he didn't see any type of value. I didn't take it that way. But I just felt like, okay, I'm starting to feel the lows. I'm starting to feel this, like maybe I'm starting to question myself. And then I remember financially struggling my first year at Indiana Bible College. My dad was he worked for the University of Akron, and he didn't love working for the University of Akron, but he did it because it allowed us to go to school for free. And he kept that job in spite because of that great benefit. And I remember times him coming home from a long day at work, annoyed and frustrated with those he worked with and just a situation, but yet him still grinning and bearing it, knowing this is for my kids. Yeah. And so I took advantage of 2 years of that. I didn't take advantage of the full 4 years like I could have there. But I do remember going to my dad, telling him, I think I'm going to go to Bible college. And he was proud of me, but yet he was honest with me. He says, son, I can't help you financially. I can't, nor am I. He says, I did this so that you can go here. But, that calling is on you. So I went to that first year. I had to work and put money together to go to that first year Bible college, and I did. But at the last semester, I still owed like $1,800, and it was at that moment where you had to pay the piper before spring break, and don't come back if you can't get up to speed. And so I remember having a conversation. I start calling my parents. Please, can you send, maybe I think I can negotiate some more time if I pay half of it. And I said, Dad, can I borrow some money and I'll pay you back this summer? And my dad, I remember him saying to this effect, he goes, what you want to do, okay, is make sure when you're bending down for those boxes, you don't throw out your back when you're moving back home. He was so straightforward. He was so brutal, like so honest. Like, and he goes, son, I love you, but I told you.
Yeah.
If it's meant to be, it's meant to be, and let's it's okay. And I felt so dejected. I remember even going to my own mom, I can at least try to swindle a little bit of money. And my mom said something to me, and I don't know if she'll ever remember this. This is my sweet mom. She's so interesting because she says, well, honey, maybe you're not called. Mm. And I remember when she said that, it hurt the most. Like, it's mom.
Yeah.
And I
said, Mom's supposed to believe in you no matter what.
Yeah, like, oh. And I said, oh, but Mom, I said, I understand that, but you didn't hear what I heard. Mm. And so after that conversation was over, and I'm going to try to fast forward this story because to give you the end of it, I went to Thursday night Bible study. It was the last Thursday night service I could go to before the following week was spring break, and I had to just pack up and go home. And Paul Mooney preached out of Isaiah 43 and verse 3. When I walk through the rivers, thou shalt not overflow me. When I, the fire won't, all these elements are not going to hurt me. And I'm just like, Lord, they're hurting me. I'm overwhelmed by it all. Yeah. And I'm at the altar. I mean, it's a Bible study. I'm probably the only one in the altar weeping. You know how it goes. Yeah. I get up, wipe my face, just make, saying goodbye to the green carpet in Calvary, Indianapolis for the last time, because I that's how I felt. And a gentleman walked up to me, a brother in that church. He says, hey, I heard you do tree work. I have some trees at my house that need to be taken down. Would you consider checking them out? And I'm like, well, yeah, I could give you a price, but I didn't think it'd come to anything. And I only had one more day there, and I said, I can give you an idea of what you'd cost. And so I drove over there, and he lived in a very, very nice, affluent house, just mansion, Mm-hmm. And he walked me around, and he had so much work. I said, sir, it's probably like $3,500 worth of work here. And he says, well, how much would it cost for you to do it? And I said, $1,800. But I said, you're going to have to rent all the equipment. I don't have the funds for that. He says, that's fine. I'll do that if you get it all down. And that week I worked by myself doing $3,500 worth of work. Wow. And got $1,800. And I walked in that school that Monday after spring break and paid up my bill. Wow. And so, but I remember just hearing no's, everyone just saying, no, that's not it. Mm-hmm. But then God would remind me in random ways and show up when I was on my lowest. Mm-hmm. And I always see this text. I'm like thinking to myself, can we handle the chastisement of the mantle? Wow. And the heaviness of the call and the things you go through to get to, like, if someone were to see me today, they were like, oh man, that guy's, it's easy street. Mm-hmm. It's like, you didn't get to a missionary overnight. Like you said, that bending over, picking pieces of paper up by up, right. That path has a story.
Yes, sir.
And I want to encourage our church people and those who are feeling the call of God, encourage them and say, listen, yes, the call of God. I didn't feel like Elisha in the story. I felt like Samuel. I felt like God was calling me and I heard his voice, but no one else did.
Nobody else heard it. Yeah.
And that's how I took it. And I will say this, my pastor, when I remember going to him the first time, he says, possibly God called. I can't tell you if he did or didn't. I couldn't tell you. And I remember thinking to myself, that I always stuck around with me, even to today, even when I meet with people who come to me and say, I feel like God's called me, I never question that. Because I remember where I was when everything was so heavy against me, and I kept hearing this. I remember when I felt that call of God before making any decision to, like you said that day where you're pounding the altar saying, either leave me alone or affirm something, right? I had that moment in as a 18-year-old at the altar of my church. And we had a guest minister come in that day, and for some reason he walked over to me and he says, what the Lord is telling you is what you need to do. And that was it. He didn't know. He goes, I don't know what that means, but you just need to follow through what the Lord's telling you. And I was melted butter. Yeah. just a puddle right there. And so there, I would even say this, and you probably agree, you have those moments where you still go, God, am I called to do this? Even after every affirmation, kind of like Gideon, right? He keeps going, but God, you're going to have to fleece this a little bit.
What I always felt was, God, I don't know what I did to deserve this, but I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't know why you called me, but I know you did. In the hardest times, in my case, I never once doubted that God called me to Chile. Not one time.
That's awesome.
And I went through some tough times.
Yeah.
Went through some trials. But one thing that you mentioned that really resonates with me is you mentioned the weight of the mantle. And that's what people don't understand.
No.
They don't understand the weight of the calling, the weight of pastoring.
Yeah. Right.
When I found out I was pastor of that church in Chile, immediately it was like somebody dropped a wet mantle on my shoulders.
Yeah.
Went down like that, and it never went away.
Wow.
Never went away. I go out on vacation or whatever, and I still carry that thing around. Yeah. But when the man that followed me came in, people can believe this or not, it doesn't matter to me. I know what happened. When I laid my hands on him, I felt it move from me to him. And without me saying anything, after service, he came to me with tears in his eyes, and he said, I felt it.
Yeah.
I felt that thing come to me. And so this is a real thing.
Yeah. Sure.
Amen.
This is not just a vocational election.
Right.
This is a calling from God, and something happens in heaven.
Yeah.
This is, and you can't get away from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
I love these. This is stories too that always encourages us to keep on fighting and keep on trusting. And we don't have much time. We're wrapping this segment up, but again, I reiterate what I started off with, is so good to have different ministers from different backgrounds with different origin stories and how they came to be, all those things. And you could probably, we can keep going down talking about it. This is like an endless subject, but we won't do that to you all. But this is part 56. But I will just encourage, if I can, our church member. And let me even back up and just say this before, I don't want to get in trouble with my parents. My mom is my biggest fan, and so is my dad. And so, in that season, I don't blame them. I don't blame anybody for not seeing what I see. It's like seeing something that's invisible that only you can see. And so I understand that. I understood that season now.
It was the making of you.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
It was that little bird breaking out of the shell. It was the making of you. Without that struggle, you probably would not have made it.
I liken it to, you see, how so many of us take the wind as his voice, the earth quaking at his voice, but until you refine yourself enough, it's the whisper. Is in the cave that it's his voice. And so that's what God was doing to me. He was helping me decipher his voice and how he speaks to me and those things. And I agree. I think that's a whole other subject, but I believe he speaks to people differently, and different tone, different ways, different actions, and confirmations and stuff like that. But I'm a blessed pastor because I have the most blessed people I get to pastor with, some of the greatest leaders. And so I thank you guys for taking the time today to record, because again, I want to challenge our church. I hope you're a Samuel where God's speaking to you, and if I don't hear it, I hope you can come to me and tell me about it, so I can do my best to help navigate you and how to respond. And I hope that you, who I do see something in you, that you don't take it the wrong way when I cast something at you, that it's not out of hurt. I hope you have the greatest perspective and understand that it's God refining you and readying you for something incredible. And so I'm grateful again for tonight and this time together. And I hope you all enjoy listening to this segment, and subscribe and share amongst yourselves. I don't know what's the moniker, as you say. But again, thank you for being a part, and God bless you, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one.